The Unveiling, Chapter 1, The Severed Strands. The pre-dawn light filtering through the lace curtains of Evelyn's childhood bedroom in Greenville, South Carolina, usually brought a quiet sense of peace. Today it brought dread. A strange, inexplicable lightness on her head, a phantom chill on her neck, stirred her from a deep sleep. She reached up, her fingers brushing against something sharp, uneven. Her heart lurched. She threw back the covers, her bare feet hitting the cool wooden floorboards. She stumbled towards the full-length mirror, her reflection emerging from the dimness like a ghost. What she saw made her gasp, a raw, guttural sound that tore through the quiet house. Her hair, her beautiful, long, thick, raven-black hair, which had cascaded past her waist just hours before, was gone, chopped, savagely, unevenly. Jagged edges framed her face, ending just above her shoulders in a grotesque, amateurish bob. Tufts of hair lay scattered across her pillow like fallen black feathers. The horror that washed over her was absolute, suffocating. This wasn't just a bad haircut. It was an act of brutal vandalism, a violation of the most intimate kind. Her hair had always been her pride, her signature, a luxurious curtain that subtly distinguished her from her classically beautiful older sister, Sarah. Sarah, with her golden blonde hair and porcelain skin. The undisputed darling of their parents. Evelyn, with her dark, artistic intensity, was always the other, the too much, the one who needed to be toned down. A cold, certain dread settled in her stomach. She knew. She knew exactly who had done this. Her parents, specifically her mother, Diana, with the likely silent complicity of her father, Richard. The wedding, Sarah's wedding, the crowning glory of their parents' social aspirations, a meticulously planned event held at a luxurious hotel in Charleston, meant to showcase their perfect family. Evelyn, a successful graphic designer and illustrator in New York, had flown down a week early to help with last-minute preparations. She had specifically chosen a simple, elegant style for her long hair, something that would complement her dress without drawing excessive attention. But in her parents' eyes, Evelyn's very presence, her unique beauty, was a threat to Sarah's spotlight. They had tried to subtly suggest she'd do something with her hair, make it less distracting. Evelyn had politely but firmly refused. This was their answer, their ultimate control. She ran a trembling hand over the jagged mess, tears stinging her eyes, not tears of vanity, but of profound betrayal. This wasn't just about looking less pretty. This was about severing her individuality, about diminishing her, about ensuring she knew her place. She threw on a robe and stormed out of her room, down the familiar hallway towards her parents' closed door. She could hear the faint murmur of voices from within, a casual morning conversation. She burst in, her voice raw with disbelief and fury. "What did you do?" she choked out, her hand flying to her mangled hair. "What did you do to my hair?" Diana, impeccable even in her silk robe, turned from the vanity, a look of feigned surprise on her face. "Evelyn, darling, what on earth are you talking about? And why are you shouting?" Richard, sipping coffee by the window, lowered his newspaper, his eyes darting from Evelyn's ravaged hair to his wife's unreadable face. A flicker of something, perhaps shame, perhaps pity, crossed his features, but it was quickly suppressed. "My hair!" Evelyn screamed, tears now freely flowing. "You cut my hair while I was sleeping. Look at it. It's ruined." Diana sighed, a dramatic, long-suffering sound. "Evelyn, don't be so melodramatic. Really, you must have tossed and turned. Or perhaps it was snagged on something. It's just hair, dear. It grows back. Her voice was laced with a chilling condescension, a dismissive wave of her hand that infuriated Evelyn further. Just hair. You took scissors to my head in my sleep. You did this so I wouldn't outshine Sarah, didn't you? You always do this. Richard cleared his throat nervously. Evelyn, your mother would never do such a thing. That's a terrible accusation. Perhaps you were sleepwalking. Or it was a bad dream. His voice was weak, unconvincing, his gaze avoiding hers. A bad dream? Evelyn laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. Look at this. This isn't a bad dream. This is an assault. This is you trying to control me, trying to make me smaller, less visible, just like you always have. Sarah, drawn by the shouting, appeared in the doorway, her golden hair perfectly styled even at this early hour. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of feigned shock and thinly veiled triumph. Evelyn! Oh my God, what happened? Her voice was dripping with false sympathy. You know what happened, Sarah, Evelyn spat, pointing a trembling finger at her. You're probably thrilled, aren't you? Now no one will look at me. Now you'll be the only pretty one. Sarah's eyes narrowed, a flash of genuine anger replacing the feigned concern. That's a cruel thing to say, Evelyn. I'd never wish this on you. And besides, it's my wedding. Of course I want to be the center of attention. It's not about you. The words, though perhaps true in their shallow context, felt like a fresh wound. Evelyn stared at them. Her parents' dismissive lies, Sarah's self-serving indignation. The room, filled with their carefully constructed deceit, suddenly felt suffocating. The air was thick with unspoken resentments, years of comparison, of being measured and found wanting. A cold calm began to settle over Evelyn, replacing the initial surge of raw emotion. The tears stopped. Her eyes, usually warm, now held a dangerous glint. This wasn't just about hair. This was about reclaiming herself. This was about finally breaking free from the gilded cage they had built around her. She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping over her family, each of them a perpetrator or an enabler of this act. Fine, she said, her voice quiet, steady, chillingly clear. If this is how you want to play, then so be it. I will not be leaving this wedding. I will be there, and you will regret this. With that, she walked back to her room, leaving behind a silence far more unsettling than any shout. The wedding was in a week. Plenty of time to turn this act of malice into an unveiling. Plenty of time for revenge. And this time, it wouldn't just be about hair. It would be about truth. Chapter 2, The Phoenix Rising. The drive from Greenville to Atlanta was a blur of righteous fury and meticulous planning. Evelyn had packed a small bag, leaving a terse note for her parents that she wouldn't be back until the wedding day. She called her best friend Claire, a whirlwind of empathy and practical advice, who had been a witness to the subtle machinations of Evelyn's parents for years. Oh my God, Ev, they actually did it? I can't believe it. That's psychotic. Claire's voice was a comforting balm of outrage. They did, and they lied about it, Evelyn said, her voice flat. They tried to make me feel crazy, like it was my fault. Don't you dare let them, Claire commanded. This is a declaration of war, Ev. What are you going to do? I'm going to Atlanta, Evelyn replied, a steely resolve entering her voice. I'm going to the best salon money can buy, and I'm going to make sure they regret every single snip. Claire laughed, a sound of grim satisfaction. That's my girl. Make them pay, Ev, not just for the hair, but for everything. Evelyn's choice of salon was deliberate. The Metamorphosis, a high-end, exclusive establishment, known not just for its transformative styles, but for its discretion and artistic vision. It was owned by Mr. Jensen, a legendary stylist in his 60s, with a reputation for understanding not just hair, but people. She walked in, her mangled hair a painful testament to her humiliation. The receptionist, a poised woman with an air of quiet efficiency, raised an eyebrow slightly at Evelyn's uneven cut, but said nothing, simply escorted her to Mr. Jensen's private consultation room. Mr. Jensen was a striking man, with silver hair pulled back into a neat ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. He greeted her with a warm, knowing smile. Evelyn, usually guarded, found herself pouring out the entire story, the years of comparisons, the feeling of being too much, the desperate desire for Sarah to be the sole star, and the brutal act of cutting her hair in her sleep. She held nothing back, the raw emotion pouring out of her. Mr. Jensen listened without interruption, his expression shifting from concern to quiet understanding, then to a flicker of something akin to artistic inspiration. When she finished, he took a moment, his gaze assessing not just her hair, but her entire presence. "Evelyn," he said, his voice deep and thoughtful. "What they did was not just an act of cruelty. It was an attempt to diminish your light, to make you conform to their narrow idea of what you should be. But your light, my dear, is too bright to be extinguished by a pair of scissors." He paused, then continued, his eyes gleaming with creative fire. "We could try to fix this, to make it passable for a wedding, but that would be to play by their rules. Instead, what if we take this act of malice and turn it into something extraordinary? A bold statement, a reclamation of self, a true metamorphosis." Evelyn's heart quickened. "What do you have in mind?" "We embrace the short. We go even shorter, but with precision, with artistry. We create a style that is undeniably chic, avant-garde even. Something that highlights your exquisite bone structure, your piercing eyes. Something that screams confidence, not compliance. And perhaps," he added, a mischievous twinkle in his eye, "a color that truly announces your arrival. Something bold, unexpected, something unforgettable." Evelyn looked at her reflection in the mirror, then at Mr. Jensen's reflection, his eyes alight with genuine passion. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about artistry, about reclaiming herself, about becoming the person she was always meant to be, unburdened by her parents' expectations. "Do it," she said, her voice firm. "Make me unforgettable." The next few days at the Metamorphosis were a revelation. Mr. Jensen and his team worked tirelessly. The uneven chop was transformed into a sculpted, asymmetrical pixie cut, daring and elegant. Then came the color, a deep, lustrous auburn, almost copper, that brought out the warmth in her skin and made her dark eyes truly sparkle. It was a radical departure, a stunning transformation. She looked fierce, independent, undeniably beautiful, but in a way that defied conventional expectations. She also took the time to choose the perfect dress, not a ball gown, not something overtly sexy, but an impeccably tailored, floor-length gown in a deep emerald green. It was elegant, understated, and timeless, its clean lines serving as a perfect backdrop for her new striking hair. It was a dress that whispered sophistication, not screams for attention. Beyond the external transformation, Evelyn also worked on her internal self. She began to see a therapist recommended by Claire, starting the slow, painful process of unpacking years of parental emotional manipulation and sibling rivalry. She journaled, she meditated, she used her skills as a graphic designer to create a new personal brand for herself, a visual representation of her newfound freedom and confidence. It was a portfolio of work that pulsed with her unique artistic vision, a stark contrast to the muted, apologetic palette she had often used before. She realized that the true revenge wasn't just about looking amazing at the wedding. It was about finding her own voice, her own power, and living a life authentic to herself. It was about cutting the invisible strings that had bound her to her parents' expectations. The physical act of cutting her hair had, ironically, become a catalyst for her ultimate liberation. She was a phoenix, rising from the ashes of their cruelty, ready to unveil her true self. And the wedding, their grand spectacle, would be her stage. Chapter 3. The Charleston Stage. The Charleston wedding was everything Diana and Richard had dreamed of. A grand affair at a historic, opulent hotel, dripping with white roses, crystal, and a guest list meticulously curated for maximum social impact. The air hummed with nervous excitement, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the polite murmur of high society. Sarah, radiant in her custom-designed gown, looked like a fairy tale princess, the epitome of the classic beauty her parents adored. Her fiancé, Mark, handsome and impeccably dressed, radiated an aura of quiet confidence and old money. Everything was perfect. Almost. Evelyn arrived late, a calculated decision. She had checked into a separate hotel, avoiding any pre-wedding family gatherings. As she stepped out of the black car at the hotel entrance, a hush fell over the small cluster of early arrivals. Heads turned. Whispers rippled. She walked with an effortless grace, her emerald green gown shimmering faintly under the soft evening lights. Her new hair, that bold, fiery auburn pixie cut, was a crown of defiance, framing her elegant features with breathtaking precision. She wasn't just beautiful, she was captivating. Her confidence wasn't a costume, it was an aura, radiating from deep within. She was the antithesis of the demure, toned-down Evelyn her parents had envisioned. She was an unveiling. As she entered the grand ballroom, all eyes, it seemed, turned to her. The music seemed to pause. Waiters stopped mid-stride, heads craned. Evelyn met their gazes with a serene, unblinking confidence. She wasn't seeking attention. She was simply existing, unapologetically in her transformed state. Diana, standing near the entrance, stiffened. Her eyes, usually so sharp, widened in horror. Her carefully constructed facade of matriarchal calm fractured. Richard, beside her, paled, his hand instinctively reaching for his wife's arm. They had expected Evelyn to be a teary, humiliated wreck, hidden away in a corner. They had expected her to blend into the background, to be the less pretty sister. Instead, she was a supernova, radiating an entirely different kind of beauty, a beauty that challenged their very notion of what beauty should be. Sarah, catching sight of Evelyn from across the crowded room, stopped mid-conversation. Her perfectly made-up face contorting in a mixture of shock and incandescent fury. Her perfect wedding, her perfect moment, was being subtly yet undeniably usurped. Evelyn, ignoring them all, calmly made her way to her assigned table, greeting distant relatives with polite smiles. She found Claire, who rose from her seat, eyes wide with admiration. "Oh, Ev, you did it! You look incredible," she whispered, a triumphant grin on her face. Throughout the ceremony, Evelyn sat composed, a silent, stunning presence. She offered polite smiles during the toasts, clapped at appropriate moments. She was a gracious guest, yet her very existence was an unspoken challenge. The reception began, and after dinner, it was time for the toasts. Mark's best man delivered a charming, if slightly bland, speech. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She had practiced this moment, rehearsed her words. But the true power of her delivery would come from the raw, authentic emotion that had fueled her transformation. She walked to the microphone, the emerald green silk whispering around her. The room, which had been buzzing with conversation, gradually quieted. All eyes were on her, especially her parents, who sat rigidly at the head table, their faces masks of apprehension. Sarah, beside Mark, watched her with a mixture of dread and resentment. "Good evening, everyone," Evelyn began, her voice, clear and strong, resonating through the ballroom. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Evelyn, Sarah's younger sister, and I'm honored to be here tonight to celebrate the marriage of Sarah and Mark." She paused, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. "My sister, we've shared so much. Childhood secrets, silly crushes, dreams of the future. You've always been the star, the one our parents proudly presented as their perfect daughter. And I was always a bit more unconventional." A ripple of quiet laughter, nervous but appreciative, ran through the room. Her gaze shifted, subtly, to her parents, then back to the room. "From a very young age, I learned that my appearance, my very essence, was often a topic of discussion. Not always in the most flattering light. My hair, in particular, was always a point of contention. It was always too long, too dark, too much. There was always a subtle pressure, a quiet expectation that I should temper my natural self, to be less, so that others perhaps could shine brighter." A collective intake of breath. The air grew thick with unspoken understanding. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Diana's face was a stony mask, but her eyes darted nervously. Richard's jaw was tight. "Just last week," Evelyn continued, her voice dropping slightly, but gaining an undeniable force. "A few days before this beautiful celebration, I woke up to find that my hair, which I had cultivated for years, had been drastically altered. It was cut, unevenly, violently, you might say, while I slept." A gasp rippled through the room, murmurs erupted. Guests looked from Evelyn's stunning, defiant new haircut to her parents, then back to Evelyn. The implication hung heavy in the air, a silent accusation more powerful than any shouted word. "It was an act, I believe," Evelyn said, her voice now filled with a quiet, profound conviction. "Intended to diminish me, to make me less visible, to ensure I would not, even accidentally, distract from the true star of today's celebration." She looked directly at Sarah, a gentle, almost sad smile on her face. "Sarah, you never needed that. You are beautiful, inside and out. Your true light shines without needing to dim anyone else's." Then, her gaze swept across the entire room, encompassing her parents, the guests, and most importantly, herself. But what they didn't realize is that some acts, no matter how hurtful, can become a catalyst for transformation. This cut, this perceived mutilation, became my liberation. It forced me to look inwards, to find my own strength, my own definition of beauty. It taught me that true radiance comes not from conforming, but from embracing every unique, unconventional, glorious part of yourself. She raised her glass, her eyes shining, not with tears, but with triumph. "So tonight, as we celebrate love and union, I also celebrate freedom. my freedom, the freedom to be authentically, brilliantly myself. To Sarah and Mark, I wish you a lifetime of happiness, of growth, and of finding your own authentic truths together. And to everyone here, remember this: the greatest beauty is the one that comes from within. Cheers. She lowered her glass. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, a scattering of applause began, hesitant at first, then growing, as some guests, genuinely moved by her raw honesty and stunning transformation, found their voices. Others, uncomfortable and shocked, remained frozen. Diana's face was beet red, a vein throbbing at her temple. Richard stared at his plate, seemingly intent on its pattern. Sarah, her face pale, looked from Evelyn to Mark, a flicker of fear in her eyes. And then Mark, the seemingly perfect groom, rose from his seat, his face contorted in a furious scowl. He seized the microphone from Evelyn's hand. "Evelyn, what the hell was that?" he spat, his voice loud, aggressive, shattering the last vestiges of polite wedding decorum. "How dare you stand up here and ruin my wife's wedding with your pathetic little sob story? This is Sarah's day. It's not about your petty grievances or your ridiculous hair. You're self-centered and spiteful, and you just proved it. Get out!" The outburst sent a shockwave through the room. Guests gasped. Sarah, instead of defending her husband or her sister, simply sat there, pale and frozen, her eyes wide, her perfectly made-up face suddenly looking small and vulnerable. Her ideal wedding, her perfect fiancé, had just been irrevocably tainted. Mark's true colors, his short temper, his lack of empathy, his controlling nature, had been brutally unveiled for all to see. The perfect facade had cracked, and Evelyn, standing tall and serene amidst the chaos, knew her revenge, profound and beautiful, had just truly begun. Chapter 4: The Ripple Effect. Mark's furious outburst hung in the air like a noxious cloud, instantly shattering the carefully constructed illusion of perfection that Diana had so painstakingly created for Sarah's wedding. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered, others stared openly. Sarah, the radiant bride, remained frozen, a deer caught in headlights, her silence speaking volumes. She neither defended Evelyn nor chastised Mark, simply existing as a shell of the joyous woman she was supposed to be. Evelyn, however, remained calm. Mark's aggression, far from diminishing her, only served to highlight the stark contrast between their characters. His ugly display of temper confirmed everything she had implicitly accused her parents of: a desperate need for control, a superficial understanding of value. She simply looked at him, her eyes holding a quiet pity, then turned and walked gracefully back to her table, leaving him sputtering into the microphone, his rage unraveling into incoherence. The rest of the wedding ceremony was a tense, uncomfortable affair. The music felt discordant, the food tasteless. The joy had been sucked out of the room, replaced by an uneasy silence and the lingering echo of Mark's angry words. Diana and Richard avoided Evelyn's gaze, their faces tight with a mixture of shame and fury. Their perfect night, their perfect family image, had been irrevocably stained. Evelyn, after exchanging a quiet, meaningful glance with Claire, decided to leave shortly after the cutting of the cake. She had made her statement. The revenge was not in lingering to see their discomfort, but in the profound, irreparable damage her truth had caused to their carefully constructed reality. The following weeks and months were a whirlwind for Evelyn. News of the dramatic wedding incident, amplified by social media and hushed whispers, spread quickly through their social circles. Stories, some accurate, some exaggerated, circulated. Evelyn, the formerly quiet, overshadowed sister, was suddenly the subject of intense fascination. But more importantly, her career began to flourish. Her transformation, both external and internal, had ignited a spark that resonated in her professional life. Her new portfolio, vibrant and fearless, attracted attention. Clients were drawn not just to her undeniable talent as a graphic designer and illustrator, but to her story, her courage, her authenticity. She started receiving commissions that were more challenging, more creatively fulfilling, and significantly more lucrative. She was no longer just a skilled artist. She was an artist with a powerful narrative, a voice. She bought a small, beautiful loft apartment in Brooklyn, New York, a place that felt truly her own, filled with light and her vibrant artwork. She reveled in her independence, in the freedom to make her own choices, to define her own happiness, free from the suffocating weight of parental expectations. Her relationship with her parents, as expected, remained fractured. Diana, consumed by bitterness, refused to speak to her for months, viewing Evelyn's actions as an unforgivable betrayal. Richard, however, occasionally sent her quiet, almost apologetic emails, filled with vague expressions of concern and subtle hints of regret. He never explicitly apologized for the haircut, but his tone was laced with a paternal sadness that suggested a dawning awareness of his wife's cruelty and his own complicity. Evelyn responded politely, but maintained her distance, setting firm boundaries. She understood that true healing would require genuine acknowledgement, not just veiled remorse. Meanwhile, news of Sarah and Mark's marriage was less rosy. The cracks that had appeared on their wedding day quickly widened. Mark, it turned out, was even more controlling and superficial than Evelyn had suspected. He was furious at Sarah for not managing Evelyn, for letting the wedding be ruined. He despised Sarah's occasional moments of insecurity, her struggles to maintain the perfect facade their parents had instilled in her. Their ideal union, built on external appearances and social expectations, crumbled under the weight of true personality. Arguments were frequent, their public displays of affection strained. The marriage, rushed and ill-fated, barely lasted 2 years before a quiet, bitter divorce finalized their separation. Sarah, devastated and alone, found herself adrift. Her carefully constructed world, built on parental approval and superficial status, had collapsed. She moved back into her parents' home, a ghost of her former radiant self. The golden girl, the perfect daughter, was no longer so perfect. She struggled with depression, with a profound sense of loss, not just of her husband, but of the life she thought she was supposed to have. It was during this dark period that Sarah, perhaps for the first time, began to truly see Evelyn. She saw her sister's quiet strength, her burgeoning success, her unapologetic authenticity. Slowly, hesitantly, Sarah began to reach out, not with anger, but with a fragile vulnerability. One evening, Evelyn received a text from an unfamiliar number. "Evelyn, it's Sarah. Can we talk?" Evelyn hesitated. Her first instinct was caution. But she had healed. She had found her peace. She realized that holding on to bitterness would only keep her tethered to the past. "Yes, Sarah," she replied. "We can talk." Chapter 5. Reconciled Reflections. The first conversation between Evelyn and Sarah was strained, punctuated by long silences and hesitant words. Sarah, humbled by her failed marriage and her unraveling life, was a shadow of her former self. She admitted, tentatively, that she had known, deep down, that their parents were behind the haircut. She admitted to her own fear of stepping out of their shadow, her own envy of Evelyn's untamed spirit. "I was so jealous, Evelyn," Sarah confessed, her voice choked with tears. "I always was. You had this fire, this authenticity that I always craved, but was too scared to embrace. Our parents always wanted me to be perfect, to fit into their mold, and I tried so hard. I thought that's what I wanted. But watching you break free, it was terrifying. And then when they cut your hair, I thought, this is it. Now she'll be like me. Now she'll be small." Evelyn listened, a profound sadness in her heart, but also a growing sense of empathy. Sarah had been a victim of their parents' manipulation too, albeit a favored one. "It wasn't about being small, Sarah," Evelyn said gently. "It was about being real, being yourself, whatever that looks like." Their reconciliation was a slow, delicate dance. They met for coffee, then dinner. They talked for hours, unearthing years of buried resentments, misunderstandings, and unspoken pain. Evelyn, now secure in her own identity, found she could offer compassion without sacrificing her boundaries. She shared her journey of self-discovery, the therapy, the artistic liberation. Sarah, in turn, began to see her own life through a new lens, questioning the values her parents had instilled in her. She eventually moved out of her parents' house, taking a small apartment and finding a new job, a less glamorous one, but one that allowed her to explore her own interests. She started therapy herself, beginning the difficult work of dismantling the facade she had lived behind for so long. She still struggled, but now she had a sister who understood, a sister who had walked a similar path, and who was willing to walk with her. Evelyn's relationship with her parents remained complex. Diana continued to be cold, unable to forgive Evelyn for humiliating them. But Richard, emboldened by Sarah's newfound independence, began to show more overt signs of regret. He sent Evelyn a handwritten letter, almost a year after the wedding, apologizing for his inaction, for allowing Diana's cruelty, and for not protecting her. It was a small step, but a significant one. Evelyn responded with measured grace, acknowledging his apology, but making it clear that trust would take time to rebuild. She visited them occasionally, but always on her terms, her new boundaries firm and unyielding. Evelyn's career continued to skyrocket. Her bold, distinctive style and graphic design made her a sought-after talent. She illustrated children's books with powerful messages of self-acceptance, designed campaigns for nonprofits promoting individuality, and her art became a beacon for those struggling to find their own voice. Her personal story, once a source of humiliation, became her strength, her inspiration. She often looked at herself in the mirror, running her fingers over her still short, stylish hair. It was no longer a symbol of violation, but of liberation. It was a constant reminder that even the most painful cuts can lead to unexpected beauty, to profound transformation. The act of malice had backfired spectacularly, turning her into the confident, authentic woman she was always meant to be. The revenge, she realized, wasn't the public humiliation of her parents or the disruption of Sarah's wedding. It was her own happiness, her own freedom, her own success, built on her own terms, not dictated by external expectations. It was the quiet triumph of becoming unapologetically herself, a radiant, powerful woman who no longer needed anyone's approval to shine. She had unveiled herself, and in doing so, had helped her sister, in turn, begin to unveil her own truth. The tangled threads of family dysfunction, once so suffocating, were slowly being rewoven into a new pattern, one of authenticity, forgiveness, and the enduring, complex power of sisterhood. Evelyn knew her journey wasn't over, but she walked forward with confidence, a living testament to the fact that true beauty truly does come from within, and that freedom is found not in conforming, but in courageously, brilliantly being yourself.